Okay, today we're going to finish up in Chapter 10 as we take a look at graphic rating scales and the behavioral anchored scales that are out there that you can use to assess performance. Now, the behaviorally anchored rating scale, or BARS, describes specific examples of job behavior which are then anchored or measured against a scale of performance. In other words, the last scale we saw indicated whether their performance was low or excellent or whatever. The BARS looks at specific behaviors and rates it. If you're creating a bar system, you can identify important job dimensions. That's what you want to do with this. You want to write short statement of job behaviors, and these are what we call anchors. You want to assign anchors to job dimensions, and we'll take a look at that here in just a minute, and then set scales for anchors. Now here's the example. Instead of saying did the job or whatever, outstanding, poor, whatever you want to put in there, here you see use positive phrases to explain product. Offered additional pertinent information. So these are specific behaviors. Discourage customers from waiting for an out-of-stock item and so forth. So you're looking here at specific behaviors, and then you can, of course, rank them: outstanding, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, and go from there on that. So behavioral BARS, behaviorally anchored rating scales, take a look at the specific behaviors that are important for that job, and then you rate them from there. Now, ranking is just the listing of employees from highest to lowest. It's the same with any ranking scheme. You're just comparing people and then taking that and listing them from highest to lowest or whatever in relation to performance and other contributions that they make. Drawbacks: ranking doesn't indicate the size of difference in performance between employees. So you may have John, who is number one, Sarah, who's number two, but we don't know how much further John is in being better than Sarah. We just rank John number one and Sarah number two. It implies that the lowest ranked employees are unsatisfactory performers, and in fact it may not be that way. It may just seem that John and Sarah have a few more things that they're doing, maybe extra or better than, let's say, Stephen, and so forth. But Stephen may still be a good employee. But ranking doesn't differentiate all of that. It just places the people in a numerical order. It becomes an unwieldy process if the group is to be ranked and that group is large. Now, force distribution is the ratings of employees' performance levels that are distributed along a bell-shaped curve. The advantages: it helps deal with rate or inflation. That means embellishing from the on behalf of the rater who is doing it. It makes managers identify higher, average, and low performers. You have the increased performance reflection that differentiate among individuals. Disadvantages: managers resist placing people in the lowest or highest groups, and force distribution makes you do that. It doesn't give an explanation for placement. Performance may not follow normal distribution, and managers may make false distinctions between employees. And here's what we mean by a forced distribution. This is really the bell curve. That's what we call the bell curve. And you go from the lowest would be here to the highest, and the median or the midpoint would be here at the height. And you go in either direction. If a person ranks a 2, then that would put them right about here, and they're going to be substandard, 20% below expectation. The 40% here is the average. This is what the average worker will do. They're meeting 40% of their productivity, or they're 40% productive, or whatever. That means they're meeting expectations. On this end, going to the left, you have the lower quadrants. Going to the right, you have those who are performing well, 20% above, 10% above, and you can score them accordingly. So the Bell distribution, as you see, doesn't leave a whole lot of room for interpretation. It's going to put you in a position that will either make you meeting the standard, or below the standard, or above the standard. Now, narrative methods, critical incident. This is where managers keep a written record of highly favorable and unfavorable employee actions. You're just writing down what happened. And if they are standing out, if these behaviors are standing out, if they are out of the ordinary for the good or for the bad, these are called critical incidences. And then you have the manager review the records at an annual evaluation or semi-annual evaluation, and you go from there. Now there's an essay method where the manager writes an essay describing an employee's performance, and the drawback, as you can see, depends on the supervisor's ability to express his or herself with the written word. Some are not very good communicators, and some may miss out pertinent and critical things that should have been in the narrative, but because the manager or the supervisor had poor communication skills, it might not make it in there. Now let's move on to a management strategy called Management by Objective, MBO. Now, Management by Objective, as you can see, is a performance appraisal method that highlights the performance goals that an individual and manager identify together. So here's really to me what the benefit of MBO is that it relieves the person from having to just punch in and do their hourly work. Instead of monitoring the hours that a person puts in or the time that they put in, they are given objectives, and their performance appraisal will be gauged by their ability to either meet or not meet those objectives. And MBO can be used in every form of production criteria. You have milestones that you set up. You come together in the process of developing objectives and go through a review, and we'll take a look at that here in the next slide. But really, management by objective is the coming to a consensus on what you want to accomplish, what you want that employee to accomplish, and measuring them by their ability to either meet those obligations or not meet them. Now, the stages in the process, you review the job and agree upon it. He agrees, she agrees, you agree, whoever it is that you're engaged with. You take a look at the job, agree upon what the outcome should be, and then go at it. You have development of performance standards, and these are the expectations of how the person is supposed to accomplish those objectives. You have setting the objectives, and normally that goes at the very beginning, where you will, along the way, develop milestones that you need to accomplish on your way to obtaining that overall objective. And then you have continuing performance discussions. As you meet, as you set those milestones, you come together and you discuss your progress or regress. And if there are adjustments that need to be made, you can make them then. And it's better to make them at that point than to go and be almost at the finish line to realize you had the wrong objective or you're not able to meet your objectives or whatever. So those are the 4 stages of the MBO process that are necessary for this type of management model to be profitable for you and effective for you. Now, when it comes to errors and the rater, there are different types. You have varying standards. If there are no set standards, if it's all subjective, then you're going to have problems with the rater and being able to assess the person. You have the recency and primacy effect. Recency is taking just the most recent information that you have and basing your appraisal on that. A person could have had a good year, but in the last month they've had difficulties. Well, if you go by the recency error, you're only going to look at that 1 month. You're not going to take a look at the past 11 months where that person has been performing. And primacy affects whatever is going on at that time as far as the productivity, what they're doing and so forth. These are the things that will really involve a subjective type of assessment. Recency deals with the latest, where primacy just deals with getting information received first when an individual is performing. So it's kind of like recency, where you take the most recent. Well, primacy is where you are giving greater weight to information received first when appraising an individual's performance. If you had the same scenario, if you were looking at the person, they've been performing 11 months and then the 12th month they really fold, then if the person comes to you or a person comes to you and said, man, they've been performing great for 11 months, you may just go with that, and that would be the most important thing. So both of these are not looking at the person from a holistic standpoint. They're only looking at the most recent and what they've heard being the last piece of information about that person. Central tendency, leniency, strictness. Central tendency is the, as we saw a while ago in that bell curve, central tendency is the amount of deviation from the center. It occurs when a rater gives an employee a score within a narrow range in the middle of the score, or in the middle of that bell curve. So you have leniency also. It falls, you let that person fall within the higher end of the bell curve because you just don't want to see them on the negative end. And strictness is having a tendency to make the person lean towards the left of the bell curve because of how strict you are on them. So central tendency is the desire to keep people in the middle. You don't want them to stand out for the good or for the bad, and they may be good or they may be bad. Leniency would be to give them high marks so that they can be on the right side of the bell curve. Strictness is putting them on the left because you are strict, and it shows when you see the distribution on the bell curve. Rater bias is just when the rater's values become first, and you're not looking at the person objectively anymore. You're looking at them subjectively. The halo and horn effect. The halo effect is if a person makes a good impression on you by doing one thing well or impresses you with something, you tend to over-embellish that person's ability to do well in every area of their performance. And horn effect is the opposite. If they do something that you don't like, then you have a tendency maybe to evaluate them negatively in light of that one negative attribute that they may have. Contrast error, and that's a tendency to rate people relative to others rather than against performance standards. So you're comparing people, and you You really can't do that. Now, ranking, you kind of compare them. You have to make comparisons, but you can go too far in just letting one person's performance be the standard for everybody else's performance, when if your policy or job description has a different type of performance criteria, you would be in violation of that person's really right to be rated fairly. Similar to me, different from me errors. If a person's similar to me and we like the same football team, or we went to the same church or whatever, that's a rating error. A person different from me, I can evaluate them based upon their differences apart from me. So those are errors. And sampling errors. And sampling errors, when you are rating people and ranking people, when you take a look at good workers versus poor workers, do you have a large enough pool to be able to derive a sample, a representative sample of the population groups? So those would be examples of some radar errors that happen quite often in business. Now, appraisal feedback. You have an appraisal interview where you communicate employees' positive contributions and you discuss their performance with them to enable them to identify their deficiencies and develop plans of improvement. And reactions of managers, employees. There's typically a negative perception of appraisals, but there shouldn't be. If you have an effective appraisal interview, then you're going to point out the good and the bad. And you're going to put it in a way, I've always heard it's good to start out with the positive, look then at the weaknesses, but always conclude on a positive. So that way they're going to be encouraged. They're not going to look at it as a chewing out or the boss is not happy with me. Try to focus and keep it upbeat as possible. Avoid negative issues or biased ratings, fear of having to confront or defend, and a lot of times that happens where the managers and employees become defensive, especially the employee, where you are trying to communicate to them what they need to improve upon, and then they take it personally. And then you may have to confront at times. So those are issues too that can give a bad reaction to the appraisal feedback. And then well done appraisals often viewed as constructive. And again, there's nothing wrong with doing a positive throughout the interview type of appraisal. You know, you're going to take care of all the negative things that they do, and they're going to hear plenty of that. But sometimes it's good just to hear what is going right with that person. Let them know that we do recognize what you're doing and we do appreciate your efforts, and keep up the good work and so forth. And that can make a big difference. Now, just some hints for the do's and don'ts of appraisals and appraisal interviews. Just prepare, be specific, focus on objective performance and not your personal assessment of them, and then reinforce employee successes. That's at the end. Just reinforce what they're doing right. Avoid talking too much. Don't lecture or berate the employee. Don't focus entirely on negative job performance. Put in the good. And don't think that the employee always has to agree. Sometimes you just have to agree to disagree. And then don't compare the employees with others. Now, effective performance management. When we get to this point, we're looking at it as a developmental tool. Feedback, appraisals, evaluations, all of these things should be used to develop the individual and not just be used as a tool to critique them. It's useful as an administrative tool if you want to give promotions, if you need to demote them, if you need to fire them. That's also the reason why you need effective feedback and performance management. And legal and job related, yes. Today we live in this state, we have employment at will clause, but that doesn't mean you don't have to justify terminating people. In today's society of litigation, people are looking at reasons to sue. So to protect yourself, you want to make sure you have an effective performance management system documented so that you can provide evidence of a person's performance history. It is effective in documenting employee performance. That's why we do it. And it's clear about who are high, average, and low performers. So you can distinguish between the people. And a lot of times, well, you're getting rid of me, but so-and-so, you show favoritism to this person and this, that, and the other. So you can take a look and you can compare performances. You can take a look at how this person performed throughout the history of his or her tenure there and justify whatever decisions you need to make about that person. And then effective performance management system, you have high, average, low performance, and those different types of performance levels are going to be clear. Again, it's a developmental tool, it's an administrative tool, it's a legal and job-related type of thing. It's viewed as fair by employees, and it's effective in documenting performance. Now you can see through all of this how important performance management is. I can't emphasize again how important performance management is, especially to document it and keep records. Today, as I said earlier, we live in a society that is litigation happy, and your only tool of protection will be the amount of proper and accurate and comprehensive documentation that you have on these employees. So I would encourage you, if you're going to go into HR, and you will be dealing with this if you do, that you develop and learn from these performance management systems and incorporate them into your department.